So, do you ever buy an art supply with the intention of using it, and then you find out there's actually a follow-up, a sequel to that art supply, and you end up buying that as well? Well, that's what we're doing today with the Paul Rubens Shi Yun watercolors. So I have set 1 here, and I have the Shi Yun Neo 2.0 set here. So those of you who have hung out with me before know I love granulating watercolors, and you know I am most interested in granulating and supergranulating watercolors as special effects watercolors for my watercolor comic 7-inch Cara. So today I am going to be unboxing and swatching both sets and putting them to the field test. So if you are interested in comics or illustration, if you're curious about these paints, you are in the right place. We're going to talk about both sets and put them to the test today. Hey there, art nerds. It's been a while since our last watercolor or art supply review, but I am back, and I am back with a vengeance. Today, we are taking a look at the Paul Rubens Shi Yun granulating and layering watercolors. Yes, y'all, I am still on my granulating watercolors BS. So let's go ahead, unbox it, swatch it, and field test it today. So I've had my eye on these watercolors for a while. You guys know I really like Paul Rubens stuff, and I typically like super granulating stuff. In fact, I have reviewed a lot of super granulating stuff, particularly the Supervision super granulating stuff here on the channel. And I guess I'm gonna keep on reviewing it. So here are some examples of the Supervision super granulating field tests, and I primarily use these in my comic work. And then, oh, I don't actually have any. I thought I had some of the Daniel Smith ones, but those are actually at the public library right now as part of their comics display. But I also have some of the Paul Rubens super granulating colors. They only have 4 in that line, so this would be the 4 they have. So this would be Moonlight Purple, Shadow Violet, Christmas Green, and then Royal Purple. And these are all super granulating colors. So one of the problems with the super granulating watercolors coming out of China is they do tend to be very light fugitive. I don't really test for light fastness here on the channel. I'm not currently set up to do that. And since I'm a watercolor comic artist, I'm not as concerned as some other artists might rightfully be. So that is not something I'm going to be testing in today's review, but I heavily encourage you guys to watch and read other people's reviews to see what they think of this product as well. I encourage you to find artists who represent the kind of work you like to make and see what they think of this. Another concern is we've started to notice that products might shift in terms of quality. They start out really great from the manufacturer, and then as they get popular, they tend to go down in quality. So it would be really interesting to hear what other artists think of this product 6 months down the line. So if you have experience with this and your opinions totally differ from mine, whatever they may be, please let me know nicely, like, you know, be gentle. My intention is never to deceive you guys, but let me know what you thought of this. This Shi Yun set contains 6 15-milliliter tubes. They are granulating and layering. I purchased this myself off of Amazon for $45.99, but it's also available on AliExpress, and I'll not only have links to where you can get it if you want to get it, but links to some of my other super granulating videos, as well as the materials used in this review and show notes, so make sure you check that description. And according to the listing, it says, high quality watercolor paint. Shi Yun paints contain high purity and fine pigments, using natural gum arabic as the binder, with high transparency, good light fastness, excellent diffusibility, perfect color mixing and layering. It is very suitable for artists of all levels. 6 granulating hues create endless effects. Our set carefully selects 6 granulating hues: 171 blue and green, 172 blue and dark green, 151 purple and black, 161 purple and blue, 152 purple and pink, and 121 dark blue and green. One paint tube can display two colors under normal circumstances. Super diffusibility. Shi Yun watercolor has a strong diffusivity, showing the most unique characters of watercolor. The paints are delicate and highly concentrated, and you can get an amazing diffusion effect with a little water. Beautiful and sturdy package. The illustration above is the god of the sea in ancient legends who protected humans from natural disasters. The box is round, textured, and comfortable to hold. And the aluminum tube has wonderful airtightness to protect from being oxidized and corroded, so you can keep them for a long time. Separately, watercolor medium equipped. Shi Yun Watercolor Paints 2.0 is equipped with a bottle of Oxgall liquid, increasing paint's fluidity, enhancing the adhesion and uniform color mixing, giving you a more professional experience. So we should have 6 tubes of paint. If this is the same listing, a bottle of Oxgall, and this beautiful cardboard box. Our cardboard box arrived shrink wrapped. On the back, it says Paul Rubens Art Supplies watercolor paper, 100% cotton rag with glitter. I think this is the wrong sticker because I've actually reviewed their glitter paper here on the channel. We've also got some information, including a website, lbsarts.com, and an email address, aowin@lbsarts.com. And we've got QR codes. And you guys know QR codes don't always do so well with me. We also have a phone number over here. So I'm going to go ahead and unwrap this. I will point out that as an art supply reviewer, I do email companies to ask questions, and they basically never get back to me, ever. So maybe I'm going about it all wrong. I usually use the contact info they provide, but maybe I should be like hitting them up publicly, like on Instagram and stuff. Maybe they'd be more likely to answer questions then. But I do try to give them a chance to speak for themselves and answer questions. It's just that they typically don't respond to me. This is really beautifully packaged. This would make a wonderful gift. We have this kind of cover sheet here, easy to remove. On the other side, I assume this is information about the paints, but we're gonna have to go to Google Translate to find out for sure. We have our 6 paints. I'm not seeing a bottle of Oxgall in here. I have some Oxgall. I never use Oxgall, so I guess today's review is going to be sans Oxgall, and if it just performs really poorly and I'm really not happy with it, I'll pull out some Oxgall and give it a shot. But what I want to check out today is I want to do some swatches and see how they diffuse into water, and then I also want to do some watercolor field tests to kind of see how well these would work in a comic art sort of situation. So those little round tests I showed you guys, those were designed to see how well that those colors would work as panel backgrounds. I'm going to do the same thing with these today. If you enjoy cottagecore, Moriki, and Studio Ghibli, I think you'll really enjoy my webcomic 7-inch Kara. It's about tiny Lilliputian Kara who discovers a huge family secret and sets out on a big adventure to find out the truth. You can read it at 7inchkara.com as a webcomic, or you can purchase Volume 1 or Volume 2 through the Natto Shop. I mentioned a little bit earlier the other Paul Rubens granulating colors. So here they are. They are 8 milliliter tubes, blue, white, and then the swatch color with a small white plastic cap. These are black tubes, fairly stylish looking too. It says Rubens. It has a color number that doesn't necessarily correspond to the color numbers that were given on Amazon. Maybe that's a different set. That'll be interesting to figure out. It says classic 15 milliliter. On the back, it has the pigment info, some light fast info, opacity info, made in China, and then the websites. It'll be interesting to try to decipher all this through Google Translate and see if we can figure out anything else. So normally when I'm doing Google Translate, I like to show you guys what I'm going to do today, just for the purposes of saving everyone some time and some frustration, is I'm going to go ahead and translate things first and then get back to you with that info. All right, so this is kind of funny. The listing I read to you guys, and it's linked at the top, that's actually for their newer set. So they actually have another 6 colors coming out. And if I like these, I'll check those out. And I should have looked really closely because frankly, the box art is different. That's on me. So this particular listing is, and I'm going to link that as well so you guys don't get confused, but I had to go into my orders to be able to find it because it wasn't showing up when I first looked it up. But this listing is around $40, so it's a little bit cheaper than the other one. It doesn't come with the ox gall, so the ox gall would be right here in the other set. Inside our packaging, we have really nice dense foam packaging. It is kind of a lot of wasted space though. I wonder if they're going to do a 12 set at some point in the future. Google Translate was not the most helpful, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the colors in this set are 413 shaded yellow, 462 dense cyan. No, I'm sorry. 462 dense cyan. So this would be 461 Chinese ink blue. They're not in the same order. This is 462 dense cyan. Then we have 478 gloomy green. Then there is 442 Misty Carmine, and finally 452 Chinese ink blue. And most of the info from Google Translate was not super helpful. It's basically like when I'm translating this, it's just Google butchering the original name, so I'm not even gonna waste your time with that. And what I mean by like just giving us garbage today is like Chebin sees incense camp powder, gong test, Sheng Xiao welcomes the dawn green curtain rolls, Tiansheng palace powder. So just not a great translation today. What's interesting though is it did translate some of the info that's written in Chinese on the back. This is going to be, take it with a grain of salt, because I have a feeling Google Translate is literally just translating the words rather than translating the meaning. But we do have a little bit of additional information about our paints. So for example, for 413, it talks about the coloring agent, which is alloplatin coloring material. And it also says something about an alto tone Mongolian color table way. Honestly, this is all going to be in the Google Doc that contains all the show notes. Mostly though, it's information like how these would granulate out. So like precipitation, black and blue, precipitation, black and blue. But some of them are more garbage than others. And when I say garbage, I literally just mean the translation quality is garbage. And since I cannot read Mandarin or Cantonese, I don't read any Chinese at all, unfortunately, I'm useless outside of Google Translate. So I'm going to put that in the description. I'm also going to include photos in case anybody would like to take a stab at it and tell us what's actually going on here. The paints in this set are 413 shaded yellow, 462 dense cyan, 478 gloomy green, 442 misty carmine, 452 dusky purple, 461 Chinese ink blue. The main additive, the main granulating additive in this seems to be PBK 11, making it fairly similar to the Van Gogh Dusk colors. All of these tubes use gum arabic as the binder, and most of them seem to be a Pigment plus R PBK 11. So my preference for working with watercolors is to work from dried half pans, and that actually works out really well for y'all because we can swatch them fresh from the tube, then we can let them dry out in the half pans in a room with a dehumidifier, and that way we can test how they reactivate, compare how they swatch from tube versus from half pans. What I have here is just 6 little half pans, a small empty tube, and some empty washi tape. I'm gonna label my half pans and just basically go from there. So really simple procedure, but I find it, first of all, I'm gonna keep everything in the order they were in the box. Even though I'm ADHD, there's something about that that's just so much more fulfilling. If I'm going to use my art supplies and they're not just going to be pretty and sit around and look nice and be aspirational art supplies, then I'm at least going to keep them in the order they came in, dang it. And if possible, keep the original packaging, although frankly, that original packaging takes up a lot of space. And while that foam insert is nice, if I get the second set, I'm probably going to ditch the foam insert and just cram all 6 tubes in there. But either way, while it makes for beautiful gift packaging, it doesn't really fit in my tackle box full of watercolor tubes. So I would have to find a different storage solution for that. But it would still stack decently well. So I'm not going to just like knock on it. Another thing they can do is Paul Rubens makes those round watercolor blocks. In fact, I have a review in the works for you guys of their larger watercolor block, but I do have a review of their smaller one already out that you guys can check out. And it would be pretty cool and a good use of space to maybe include one of those watercolor blocks and just charge a little bit extra. I don't know. I'm always thinking about like how to make something into a good kit. So what we're going to be looking at today is we are going to be looking at granulation. We're going to be looking at how the colors split and how the colors kind of diffuse out into water. Again, I'm looking at this as a comic artist, so I want to see how useful these will be for beautiful comic backgrounds where maybe I don't want to have to draw everything in the panel and I want to kind of capture an emotional moment. And these sort of super granulating colors can be great for that. Okay, so we've got our 6 half pans. Time to label them and I guess put them in first and then fill them, because once they're filled, we can't just push them in.
When filling up half pans, I find it easier to go ahead and label them before I pour in the paint. That makes it a lot easier to actually get them labeled. I also tend to put them into the palette that I'm using first and then fill from there, because that's also easier than trying to push in wet half pans. Interestingly, and perhaps fortunately, there was no weird separation or additional gum Arabic. This is a big improvement over the Supervision super granulating colors. Everything came out cleanly. There was no spilling or burping.
This muted color palette really kind of reminds me of the Boko Undo Gansai watercolors that I reviewed a while back. I have the second set of shadow colors for that to review as well, but since we moved in the interim, I don't know where my first set went. So I've been looking for my first set because I'd like to compare the two head to head. And it would be pretty cool to compare this set against those sets as well. Now, Gansai watercolor is formulated very differently from this, but it would still be fun to do some head-to-head swatches. So if that's something you guys are interested in, let me know down in the comments. So we have our half pans poured. I'm going to do my first set of swatches now while it's still nice and fresh. And for today's swatches, I am going to be using cotton rag paper. I'm going to be using the Blick Studio cotton rag paper. You guys see me use this all the time. It was going to be this or the bow hang, and I decided to go with the Blick for comparison. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with my granulation swatch test, they're a little bit different from my normal swatch test because we really want to let the water do most of the work. So I am hoping to get 3, 3, and then leave room for our, second set of swatches. I have a cup of clean filtered water. I live in Southeast Louisiana. We got a lot of minerals in our water. So I like to kind of remove that from the equation. So I use filtered Kentwood. So I've put down a swatch of just clean water. I'm gonna grab some of our paint. Now, working with it like that straight from the tube, it's gonna be not nearly as well mixed as I would like. And then I'm just going to dab it into our watery swatches so we can get some, hopefully, diffusion. This is gonna encourage those colors to really granulate out. And then by its side, I'm going to do a mass tone or maybe a gradiated wash. Can't talk today, sorry y'all. Gradiated wash swatch. Brain's trying to compare the two. So I'm going to do that for all 6 colors and then we'll let them dry.
If you're interested in super granulating watercolors for whatever reason, I have a ton of videos that also include field tests where I demonstrate how I go about testing out super granulating watercolors, what super granulating watercolors I've actually tested, and my intended use case for them. Since I'm a comic artist, I think these could be really useful for atmospheric, moody backgrounds or maybe monochromatic panels. So that's kind of what I'm already trying to go for here. With all this water, this is going to encourage the colors to granulate out. It's going to let us see those interesting splits. But some artists utilize super granulating watercolors in a more concentrated format to kind of get more color depth to their illustrations. While I couldn't capture the full dry time because I had some errands to run, you can already start to see it granulating out. It seems to be the base color plus black, very similar to the Van Gogh Dusk colors, and it dried mostly color plus black, again, similar to the Dusk colors. I was hoping for more variety in the splits.
These have had a chance now to fully dry. I apologize that I couldn't share the whole dry time in hyperlapse, but I had an appointment to make. And these activated very quickly, and I don't have to fight off excess gum arabic, and they went into the water really readily. The colors are very muted but very beautiful. A subdued color palette, perfect for dark woods or caves. And you don't need a lot of paint to get a lot of colors, so it'll be interesting to see how these kind of reconstitute. And these dried mostly the color plus black, very similar to the Van Gogh Dust colors. I was hoping for more variety in the splits, but frankly, I don't know if I have a right to complain. Right here, it's like PBK 11, PV 23. PBK 11, PG 7. PBK 11, PR 254. PBK 11, PY 110. PBK 11, PB 15. PBK 11, and PB 29. So it's pretty much, I was hoping this would be a little bit more, but I think that just means what it's made up of. And then most of these are looking like they are semi-transparent. Just double checking to see if any of them are not. Nope, they're all semi-transparent. And it looks like they all have 5 little pluses of light fastness, which I don't know, every company kind of ranks them on their own. Like every company has their own ranking system. So, you know, it makes it difficult to tell just how light fast something is without more information. So I am going to go put these on top of a dehumidifier, give them a chance to really dry out, and we'll see how well they reconstitute. So these have dried on top of my dehumidifier for several days now. They are pretty solid. They are pretty dry. And that's a great way if you're decanting your watercolors into half pans to dry them out a little bit quicker is dehumidifier. That's the way to go. So what I want to do now is I want to re-swatch them. We're going to see how well they reconstitute. We're going to see if anything changes and how they handle. If anything, it should actually be a little easier to handle. That's what I've noticed with, you know, these kind of super granulating watercolors, is that they typically become a little more saturated and become a little easier to deal with. And then we will create our little color map here at the top. So I was thinking about this. I was thinking it would be really cool to do a big super granulating or granulating swatch off where we compare just a bunch of stuff that granulates against a bunch of other stuff that granulates, and maybe I'll even throw in the Boko Undo Sumiesque colors and shadow colors just because they're kind of similar to this anyway, and I might as well. So if you'd be interested in seeing a big old showdown like that, please let me know down in the comments. So y'all, it is swatching time.
Being able to decant watercolors in a half pan and reactivate them from a dry state is really important to my workflow, so it's something I always test when I'm reviewing watercolors. And fortunately, the Shi Yun watercolors reactivate quite well. I would almost say they reactivate better than when they were straight from the tubes because you get more of that color intensity. This is something that I found is pretty common with these super granulating watercolors. They may perform a little bit better if you let them dry out.
Even after allowing it to dry out for a couple of days, the colors are really responsive and I think more saturated. Like I'm seeing more of the teal in the teal split. I'm seeing more of the green in the green split than I do in the ones that were just straight from the tube. I'm also seeing more blue in the blue split. So that's pretty cool. And they activated really quickly and they deliver a lot of color payoff. So you know, I'm a half pan person myself. This is my preferred format rather than like leaving a lot of like half wet tube splops all over the place or working from tubes. I just don't work in that amount. So for me, this is a lot more economical. And I'm always really happy when watercolors work a little bit better from this format because it just kind of justifies how I'm handling the watercolors. So the last thing I'm going to do before we move on to the field test is I'm going to make a little color map for myself just as a handy reference since the mass tones on these are so dark. So this isn't the field test. I was weak and I went ahead and I ordered the second Shi Yun granulating set. So it's another set of 6 paints because I like the color swatches in this one as well. And I figured since it was at a lower price point, I'd go ahead and get it. So what we're gonna do is, we've already talked about this, we're gonna talk about this, and then we're gonna do the field test. And that should wrap up all of the Paul Rubens Shi Yun paints that are available unless they release a third set. But hopefully that wraps up all the Shi Yun paints that are available. So we have our 2 different covers. I think this one is the water god and this one looks like a dragon god. I'm not going to go ahead and translate everything in it since we did that for the first one. I feel like a lot of the information is probably going to be the same thing. So let's go ahead, unbox
in the
and
Shi
swatch
Yun
these paints.
Neo 2.0 set are 171 Thousand Hills Green. It utilizes gum arabic. The pigments in it are PB29, PY150. It is semi-opaque and it has 5 plus signs for performance, and the performance style is Precipitation, and the poem is thousands of mountains, green snow outside the gate, Qianshan, green flowers, and riverside. We also have 151 purple smoke, which uses PV15 and PBK11. It is semi-opaque. It has a performance of 5+ signs. The precipitation is purple black ice. The poem for this one is Swim, Ziyan, to control pirates and control the wind. Chisong swims to Ziyan. We also have 161 Azure Shadow Classic, which uses PB28 and PV19. It is semi-opaque with a performance of 5+ signs. Its poem is Azure Shadow Bamboo House is sloping high and low. There are people in the blue shadow. 171 is Gloomy Green, which uses PB29 and PG7. It is semi-opaque with a performance of 5+ signs. The poem for this is Ziyan Water Green at night, lonely boat without a clue, Niying Ziyan Water Green. We also have 152 Banjiang Red, which is PB29 and PV19. It is semi-opaque with a performance of 5+ signs. The poem for this set is Road Setting Sun is half river in the water, half river red, 1 ENS, half river red. Then finally, we have 121 Yellow Cloud Twilight, which is PB29, PO48, and PV150. It is semi-opaque with 5+ signs, and its poem reads, the autumn wind is moving. Hyung Yun Moon returns to Sonyang to find his old teacher, ENS Hyung Yun Moon. And this set is a fair bit brighter than the first, which is more like the Boko Undo shadow colors or the Van Gogh dust colors.
Have 6 colors, but this time we also have some oxgall in the center. So you guys can see the original set, no oxgall, the second set, oxgall, but these are different colors with different properties. Okay, I've got some translations for you guys, and Google Translate did a much better job this time, so we're going to be working our way around, starting with Thousand Hills Green. The binder is gum Arabic. It uses PB29 and PY150. It is semi-opaque with 5+ signs of permanence, and the performance is precipitation. And there's also a little bit of poetry on the other side. Thousands of mountains, green snow, outside the gate, Qianshan, green flowers, and riverside. Then next is 151 Purple Smoke, which still uses, they're all going to use gum Arabic. They're all going to have 5+ signs of light fastness, and they're all precipitating colors. Sorry. So this one uses PV15 and PBK11, and its poem reads, Swim Ziyan to control pirates and control the wind. Chisong swims to Ziyan. Then next we have Azure Shadow Classic, which uses P828, but I think it's supposed to be PB28. It might have been a mistranslation there. And PV19. Azure Shadow Bamboo House is sloping high and low. There are people in the blue shadow. Then 172 is Jianshui Green, and I apologize for my pronunciation, which uses PB29 and PG7. And the poem for this one is Ziyan Water Green at night, lonely boat without a clue, Ni Yi Ziyan Water Green. Then we have Banjiang Red, which uses PB29 and PV19. The poem for this one is Road Setting Sun is half river in the water, half river red, 1 ENS, half river red. Then we have 121 Yellow Cloud Twilight, which uses PB29, PO48, and PB150. It is semi-opaque and has 5 stars of light fastness. And the poem for this one is, the autumn wind is moving. Hyung Yun Moo returns to Sonyang to find his old teacher, ENS Hyung Yun Moo. So these are pretty similar to the tubes in the other set. Seems to be the same size, just different colors. And then in the center is a tiny little glass jar of oxgall. Now, I don't generally use Oxgall. You can use Oxgall to encourage your watercolors to precipitate a bit more. I'm not really having a problem with these, so I don't know that I'm going to even use this. But it's nice that they included it. So I'm going to test these out the same way I tested the first set out on Blick Studio Cotton Rag watercolor paper. In fact, here are my swatches from the first time. So as you guys remember, because you literally just saw it, even though it's been 2 weeks for me, these were done straight from the tube with lots of water. And then these were done after they'd been dried in half pans. And I'm going to do the same thing for this set here.
We're going to do the same thing that we did with the first set. We're going to swatch straight from the tube, then we're going to decant into half pans, allow it to dry out fully, and swatch again, because testing that reactivation is really important. If you're looking for more color, if you're looking for more granulation splits, if you're looking for something more interesting than base color plus black, the second set is going to definitely fit that. There's some colors that seem a little familiar here, whether it's from the Supervision sets or from the other Van Gogh Supergranulating, not Van Gogh, I'm sorry, Paul Rubens Supergranulating watercolors that I've reviewed for you guys in the past. We do see some familiar faces. So if you've already bought the original 4 Paul Rubens Supergranulating colors, you might not feel the need to get this set. But I would recommend getting this set over those colors because there are some additional interesting splits and mixes. I did things a little bit in reverse this time. I swatched my colors. Now I'm going to go ahead and put them into half pans. I have to say, putting them into half pans first and then swatching them and just allowing them to dry out is way easier and quicker. So I'm just going to continue this palette from the first colors that we had. So we're going to have 12 colors in this total since there are 2 lineups. And I would recommend the second set over the first set just because I think the second set is more interesting. And I think it's going to make for some more interesting comic backgrounds. We're starting to see a lot of those kind of moody PBK 11 or other shadow color plus a toning color, or maybe I just review a lot of that because Derwent offers a lot of that kind of stuff too. So I feel like I'm getting kind of tired of seeing that, but I always love seeing interesting color splits because they can be useful for denoting interesting mental activity, interesting thought processes in a comic panel, and that's a very easy way to do it. Also, I apologize that my voice is starting to crack a little bit. I've been sick and I'm on the mend, and I wanted to finally get this video wrapped up so I could share it with you guys.
These have had several days to dry out, so I'm going to re-swatch them and we're going to see how that changes, if at all. But generally, as I mentioned earlier, working from dried out half pans is my preferred format. So if paints don't work well from half pans, they're generally not a good fit.
I've allowed this palette to dry out for a week, so I'm going to reactivate it by spritzing it with some clean water. And then we're just going to do the same test all over again. I found that these colors, much like the first set, are almost better once you've let them dry out. They kind of intensify a little bit. It's easier to get that really nice punch of saturation. This is really my preferred method of working. I find that there's less waste, like less excess paint waste, and I find it just easier to kind of keep up with since I have a cat and there's cat hair floating around everywhere. I can shut these kind of palettes and kind of keep the cat hair out. So this is my preferred working method.
So as with most of the other supergranulating watercolors I've reviewed, I find that I actually like these better from their dried out half pan form. I didn't really have any problems reconstituting them, and it was a little bit easier to control the color. We also get a little bit more noticeable color splits because it's a little bit easier to control all the color that's going down on the paper. So we have swatched, dried, and swatched the Paul Rubens Shi Yun Set 1 and Set 2. Now it's time for the field test.
So now on to the field test. I ran out of those little mini watercolor rounds that I'd purchased on AliExpress, and no one seems to be selling them anymore, the little Maritini rounds, the mini ones. So what I did is I bought a paper puncher off of Amazon, and I punched out some 3.5-inch circles from my Blick Studio watercolor paper. It's a little bit more difficult to work at this small of a size because it does have a more pronounced tooth, so I do need to be careful when penciling and inking, so I switched over to a Tombow Fudenosuke brush pen, which has a smaller brush pin tip and is a little bit firmer than my Sakura Pigment FB, but is still waterproof. And I find it took some getting used to, but it's a little bit easier than using the Pigment FB at this size. If you follow me on TikTok, these look familiar to you. I've been sharing them. I love sharing the drawing process. It's so satisfying watching a drawing just kind of come to life out of the ether. And I've also been sharing them to my YouTube shorts. So if you find these sort of things relaxing or enjoyable, I hope you guys will check me out over on TikTok. I'm at Natto Soup. I also share kind of a variety of things. I share a lot of time-lapse art process. Sometimes I share art supply reviews. It kind of just depends on what I'm working on at the time, but it's a good way to get a sneak peek for what I'm working on here on the channel. And these have been sped up so much, so much. I can't even tell you how much. Obviously, no one draws this fast. I draw relatively quickly. Each of these was completed anywhere from, I should say the sketch stage was completed anywhere from 4 to 6 minutes, inking same amount of time. So, you know, roughly 15 minutes each. And I would do just 1 or 2 a day just to kind of as like in between things, because these kind of big field test things, they can kind of take over, and I'm trying to be good about keeping everything moving along and not stalling out. So I did 12 of these. So as you guys can imagine, it did take a little while, but this is a really good way to test out if these will be suitable and how they might feel for comic panels without committing them to a comic panel, which is kind of a chickeny way of doing it. But on the other hand, I end up with all these cute mini illustrations, so, you know, it kind of depends on what you're looking for. But if you're interested, I've been working on recording my Chapter 9 process and progress as a vlog. So I have a bunch of how to make comic tutorials here on the channel. Hopefully, if you're interested in comics, you'll check them out. I know my Intro to Comic Craft playlist is like the big one, but I also have a Making Comics and Zines playlist, and I think I have a Comic Prep and Process playlist as well, and all of them kind of cover different things. But if you're interested in the comic process, whether you're interested in it for watercolor or you're interested in it because you're going to do it in a different medium, I've got a lot of tutorials. So here is where we're really testing out how these paints might work. So for each one, I'm putting down some MT masking tape. I swear it's the best white masking tape. I've tried a bunch of washi tapes, and it is the best one I have found outside of my 3M Blue Painter's tape. I'm applying some clean water to the background, and this is a cotton rag watercolor paper, so it's going to take a lot of water. It's also going to allow for a lot of diffusion, and I kind of dip my color into the water and allow it to diffuse, because what I'm really going for here is kind of those moody, easy, atmospheric backgrounds. My fellow comic artists know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it's good to just have some like stock, fairly easy backgrounds that kind of imply an emotion, or they imply a thought process, or they can imply an environment without requiring a lot of work or a lot of effort for the reader to decipher. I could really get into like, not every panel on your comic page needs to be this fully rendered out illustration, because that really kind of drags down the story and it takes longer to read. And it's also a lot of work for you as an artist, because most people spend at most a minute looking at a comic page at a given time. So you have to really kind of is it worth it to put all that time in for something that people aren't necessarily going to see, and it can sometimes make the story feel really slow. So these kinds of easy atmospheric backgrounds can be really helpful, and plus they're just fun. I just really enjoy the super granulating colors. I think they're fun. So this is a good way to kind of test suitability and when certain colors might be preferable over other colors. I also allow the background our wet into wet to dry fully before I remove my little watercolor cookie from the support. In this instance, I'm using some chipboard. It's just from the back of an old watercolor pad. So it can actually, once you get going with watercolor, it can be very economical to continue going with watercolor. The big expense is just kind of getting started with watercolor. And I've amassed my dragon hoard of watercolor supplies literally over a decade. So, you know, you don't have to do it just overnight. About a $100 commitment. If you go in knowing what you're looking for, and I'm here to help you, I review all the stuff. So hopefully I can make some helpful recommendations so you can get started on your watercolor journey, because it's my goal to help you guys make art a habit. I figure if more people make art, whether professionally, which can be very daunting, or just for the love of making art, it's going to make it easier. There's going to be more art appreciation out there. I figure if more people are invested and understand what goes into making art, there'll be more art appreciation, more people willing to spend money on art, more people willing to support the arts, more people willing to hire artists to teach and to do things. So that's like my super secret shady goal, is to just foster a love of art by fostering people feeling like they're empowered to pursue it. And I know in the US, our art education is hit or miss at best. It's often the thing defunded first. I've lived in so many areas where they felt like hiring a math teacher to teach art, a math teacher with no artistic background whatsoever, was better than hiring an artist. So that's why I try to kind of help fill in the gaps here on YouTube. And I also teach at a few different public libraries, because it's part of my goal to make art as accessible as possible. And I'm just one person, but I'm doing my best. And that's also why I'm offering the NATO Scholarship, which is a smaller art scholarship. There's 3 tiers to it: $1,000, $500, and $250. And I mean, I'm just one person and I'm an artist by trade. So you guys know I don't have a lot of money, but I'm offering what I can because I know how expensive it is taking art classes and buying art supplies. And when I was going to undergrad and to art school, I didn't have a lot of financial help for that. So it was often a struggle to be able to afford the supplies that I needed, let alone get to the store to buy them. So hopefully the NATO Scholarship can help 3 people afford their art supplies for that semester, or pay for a class, or make it just more accessible. But I'll have a link down in the description below where you can learn more about the NATO Scholarship, and maybe you can apply. I'm not judging based on grades. I'm not even necessarily judging based on how great somebody is right now. I'm looking for potential. I want to see sketchbooks. I want to see thumbnails. I want to hear your ideas. But it's an art scholarship aimed at helping sequential artists. So picture book artists, comic book artists, animators, sequential artists, helping them out specifically. So if you love comics, animation, or picture books, and you want to take some more classes, that could be a scholarship well worth looking into. Now, one big difference between these field tests and my actual comic pages is when I'm painting 7-inch Cara, I'm painting on Canson Mont Val, which is a cellulose-based watercolor paper, whereas I'm using Blick cotton rag paper for these little illustrations. And one of the reasons I use Mont Val for comic pages is there's some things that a good cellulose can do that a cotton rag paper is not necessarily going to do as well. And one of those things is really sharp details. I can get sharper details on the Mont Val than I would if I were painting on a cotton rag watercolor paper. It also has kind of a layer limitation, which, since I'm painting comic pages and not illustrations, that can be a good thing. Because when you're painting hundreds of comic pages, you can't spend a week hunched over one single page, really pouring your heart into it. That's just not, that's a passion project. And I understand, believe me, I understand passion projects. That's basically all that I do are passion projects. But you do have to draw the line somewhere and move forward with the story. And I find that those limitations actually help me continue with the work and allow me to move forward and make progress. So we have progressed onto the second set, the Neo 2.0 colors. I'm not really going to go into which colors are which, since I talked about that with you guys earlier. I will have show notes down in the description below, and I can share a label photo of the finished field test if that's helpful for you guys. But I mean, since they don't seem to sell these open stock right now,
Really, the big important delineation is one set versus the other set, or where one set starts and the other set ends, rather than individual colors, because at least at this point in time here in the US, you can't get these open stock, which is one of my big nitpicks, because there's some colors I absolutely love, and then there's some that I would have skipped and not spent my money on if I'd had the option. So for those of you who are watching and are curious about when I'm going to talk about the Schmincke super granulating colors, that is in the works. That has been in progress for over a month now, because it's been very piecemeal, and it has another lengthy field test kind of like this one. So I'm working on it, and I hope you guys will consider hanging around, subscribing, clicking that bell notification, letting YouTube know that you are interested in more from me. So here is set 1. As you guys can see, they're more like the Van Gogh dust colors. They're more of like a darker atmospheric sort of color. And make sure you check the description below, because I'm going to link my other super granulating reviews. And then this is set 2. These have brighter colors. There's colors we've already seen, maybe from Supervision or from Paul Rubens, with a couple of exceptions. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I don't do light fast testing, mainly because as a watercolor comic artist, my comics get scanned and I color correct them digitally and I letter them digitally. My end goal is to print a book. My end goal is not to create a piece of art. And speaking of, this is my book, 7-inch Kara, as we've talked about many times before. I just wanted to remind you before we get too far in. Batch painting is very similar to how I used to do convention commissions. It's also kind of similar to how I do comic pages, in that with comic pages, I'll select like 4 pages. I'll select a scene and basically paint them all at the same time using kind of the same colors that I've mixed, and it really streamlines the process. It makes it go a lot faster, and it makes color consistency between scenes and between characters a lot easier for me to control. And I've talked about that so much here on the channel in Intro to Comic Craft and in Watercolor Basics. A lot of how I got into watercolor at all is in service to 7-inch Kara. Although I've loved watercolor for years, that was kind of the impetus that forced me to try out different materials and try out different techniques and take a lot of classes and do a lot of reading and do a lot of practice and doing a lot of studying, because I wanted to be able to paint this long form watercolor comic, and I wanted it to be good looking. I wanted it to be something that people wanted to read. So if you've read 7-inch Kara, whether as a web comic or as a physical comic, it would mean the world to me if you let me know what you think. A review on Amazon helps so much, and it costs you nothing. And if you really like Kara and you'd really like to help support what I'm doing, filling out a library request form at your public library asking them to carry the book so that other people can enjoy it is huge. It's something I can't do for myself, and it costs you nothing but a little bit of time, and it is such a phenomenal help, and I just sincerely appreciate it. So the circles at the top 2 rows, those are the first set, and the circles at the bottom are the second set, just, you know, in case you're getting a little bit confused. And this set is inspired by Mori Key and cottagecore fashion. That's a big inspiration for 7-inch Kara. And not because I am particularly tied to the gender roles that it often ascribes to. I actually really don't like those gender roles. As someone who doesn't conform to those gender roles, I'm not a fan of them, and I'm not necessarily pushing them. And if you read Kara, you'll see that Kara wears a variety of different outfits. Her mother tends to dress her very practically. She's always dressed cute. That's something I care about, but it's really about whatever works for whatever adventures Kara's having. But I do happen to like the clothing aesthetic. I think it's very cute. So I wanted to draw Kara in a variety of cottagecore and Mori Key inspired outfits. So you guys could see, I basically painted all the elements that are the same first. So the hair, the eyes, the skin, those sort of things. And then I focus on the elements that are different. So mixing up different colors for clothing, that sort of thing. I save that for the end. And that's one of the ways that this process is a lot faster than working out one page at a time. Now, some artists do work one page at a time. That's actually very common for for webcomic artists to do, because when you're updating once or twice a week, you really need to focus on getting that page done. I've put
Kara on hiatus as a webcomic for the time being while I work on chapter 9. In fact, the book, the second volume, is much further than what is available online, just as a chance to kind of give myself an opportunity to catch up. So here are my finished mini field tests. I am very satisfied with how they turned out. I really like how the backgrounds look, and I really look forward to putting them to good use on physical comic pages. All that's really left is to allow them to dry fully and then very carefully remove them from the gator board support. You know, leaving the masking tape, I can remove that later. That's not really a big deal. And I'm just kind of pulling up gently just to prevent any tearing of the paper. I don't care if I tear the tape, but I don't want to tear the paper itself. I was more impressed by the Neo 2.0 set than I was by the first set. But hopefully you guys saw what you needed to see to know if either or both of these sets are useful for you, something you would want in your watercolor palette. I'm going to have links, Amazon affiliate links, down in the description below if you'd like to get your own set.
These super granulating reviews are always a lot of work. The way I do the field tests are meant to kind of sort of emulate how I would do comic pages. So I end up making a bunch of tiny illustrations, painting them in batch as you guys saw, and kind of using that to help me decide how well these might work as backgrounds for watercolor comic panels. And I think the Shi Yun watercolors are very promising. At least I like what I see. Now, some of them are really similar to some of the Supervision Supergranulating colors or the Schmincke Supergranulating watercolors. And we'll actually talk about the Schmincke a little bit later on because I am working on swatching and then field testing a bunch of their supergranulating colors, including the dubiously available Desert and Shire sets. So if you are interested in that, make sure you click subscribe and the bell notification so that YouTube lets you know when I've got that for you guys. But there's a lot of color similarity, especially in set 1 with some of those. So the first 6 I'm going to show you guys are from set 1, and they do have some really pretty colors. I am not the one to be able to tell you guys if these are going to be more light fast than the Supervision ones, simply because since I'm a watercolor comic artist, I don't normally test for light fastness unless there's a specific reason for me to, because my whole goal with watercolor is to paint for reproduction. I'm going to be producing books, and I don't have to worry about the individual original pigments light fastness if my end goal is to paint the pages and display them in a portfolio when I'm at conventions, or to maybe put them up on my walls behind UV glass, or to scan them and digitally alter them so that they're finished comic pages with lettering in them and then sell them as books. That's just not something that's important to me, but I know it is really important to a lot of other artists, and there are other creators here on YouTube who do light fast testing, because that is part of the kind of art they create, where they're creating art to sell and they're creating art for display, and that longevity is really important to them. So if I wasn't able to answer all your questions here, and the light fast thing is a really important one to you, and there are reasons why it should be, I hope you will also check out their reviews as well, because these sets can be kind of expensive. They're about 60 bucks a pop, depending. I got both of mine on Amazon. I'll have links down in the description below where you can get your own. You can also get them on AliExpress for about the same price. So they can be expensive. So, you want to make sure that they're going to do everything you need them to do before you spend all that money. So I would recommend, if I couldn't answer all your questions, checking out some of them. And speaking of checking out, if you like my art, if you think this character is cute and you haven't checked out my comic 7-inch Kara, you can read it as a webcomic at 7inchkara.com. The first 8 chapters are there, or you can order it in dead tree format through 7inchkara.com/shop. Volume 1 and Volume 2 are both available And it's a sweet watercolor comic, almost all watercolor. The only thing not watercolor are the occasional bonus chapters, or sometimes in different media, just for different reasons, just to add some spice and variety to life. And 7" Kara is the whole reason why I even review watercolors. Initially, I was using just Winsor & Newton, which was getting really expensive because the Winsor & Newton half pans cost as much as the smaller Winsor & Newton tubes. And I wanted to kind of spread my wings and see if I could find watercolors that had different properties, that lasted longer or activated more readily, just offered something a little bit different from what I was used to. So I started reviewing watercolors to kind of help me find watercolors that I would love more, would offer different special effects, or would be more economical in the long run. So 7" Kara is a big driving force for what I do here on the channel, whether it's product reviews, tutorials, or con recaps. It all kind of circles back into what I'm doing with 7" Kara. So it'd really mean a lot to me if you guys took a moment to check it out. Like I said, you can read it for free if you like. If you like Studio Ghibli, The Flying Witch, Yotsubato, or if you enjoy Moriki or Cottagecore, or if you just enjoy comics in general, I think you guys will really like 7" Kara. So hopefully you guys will head on over to 7inchkara.com once you finish watching this and check it out. So I actually really liked these sets. Set 1 is very similar to the Boko Undo Sumi-esque colors with more granulation, also very similar to the Van Gogh Dusk colors. So a lot of what set 1 is your non-granulating color plus a more finely milled black, maybe a charcoal black. It's not as granulating as, say, lunar black. So if you find the dust colors to be a little too gritty for you, these could be a better option. But where it gets a little more interesting, in my opinion, the set I prefer would be the second set, because that's where we start getting some of the really pretty color splits. Now, again, light fast concerns, definitely. Some of these colors look like they're using a dye as the staining color, and as we know, dyes are typically not light fast. So if you are buying these to create art to display or to sell the originals of, and people are going to display them, that's going to be a concern. But if you are buying these because you're an artist like me who does most of her work for reproduction and scans it and either prints it as books or on postcards or t-shirts or what have you, this shouldn't be that big of a problem for you. Basically, if you're using Brusho, these are not going to be any worse, any more fugitive than Brusho. So set 1 has a dragon on it. If you're looking, because I got kind of confused on Amazon and I had to really double check when I didn't realize there was a second set when I bought the first set. And then set 2 has this kind of beautiful cloudscape to it. And as you guys might remember, set 2 has the, I might have just gotten these mixed up. I did. Forget what I said. This is set 1. Apologies, beautiful cloudscape. Set 2 has a dragon god on it. And the way I know is that set 1 did not come with Oxgall and set 2 does come with Oxgall. And I don't really use Oxgall. It's meant to encourage more granulation, but I was pretty happy with what we have here. So if you want a more extreme effect, you can use the Oxgall to kind of force the granulation. But I think working on a cotton rag paper with a cold press texture like I do is going to give you what you're looking for. So I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. That was a long one. We had a lot to swatch. We had a lot to paint. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me and doing just that. These are self-cut watercolor rounds. They were cut from Blick Studio cotton rag paper using a large circle punch because I can't find the Maritini rounds anymore. And I think it worked out well. I would have liked a larger punch. I have a 3.5-inch punch, and a 4-inch punch would be better. They also sell circle cutters. I could go that route. I could use a Cricut and cut a bunch. You know, I have options. The punch is the one that's just easiest for me. And then they have different types of punches too. So, you know, you can do different kinds of designs. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the Schminka video because I actually show myself cutting some of these punches out. But if you like the round watercolor format and you don't necessarily want to work in a block, or you want to be able to work with the paper of choice, as long as you don't mind working small, and frankly this is almost the same size as some of my comic panels, so it's not that small, that could be an option for you, and it would allow you to work with the paper that you enjoy working with. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I had fun. I hope you guys had fun. A huge, amazing thanks to my awesome art nerds on Patreon. This was a more expensive one to review. We used a lot of consumables between the paper and the punch outs and my regular watercolors that I used to paint the basic Caras. And then the supplies themselves are expensive, and all of this is offset by the funds raised from my Patreon. I always use the money from Patreon to buy more stuff to review here for the channel, or to buy consumables on occasion, and their support helps me continue to do this, and I sincerely appreciate it. So thank you guys so much. If you can't afford to join me on Patreon, I understand. I know times are tough right now. Another great way to support what I do is, of course, to subscribe and click the bell notification and let YouTube know that you want to hear more from me. Another big way, huge way to help is word of mouth. Share this video with people or a person you think would benefit from it or would enjoy it. You helping me spread the word on Twitter, Tumblr, Reddit, wherever you frequent with people who trust you and trust your judgment is such a big help, and it doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of your time, and it really helps me out a lot. So thank you guys again for hanging out with me. Hopefully you guys will check out 7-inch Cara, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon. Bye guys!